At the centennial gala of the Whitmore Legacy Foundation, I was supposed to be invisible. That was the plan. Just show up, smile politely, wear something black but not dramatic, don't speak unless spoken to, and above all, don't spill anything. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers that cost more than my annual salary, the air thick with perfume, politics, and people who never once pronounced my name right. I wasn't there as family. I was there as an obligation. A reminder that Nora Whitmore Black Sheep and nonprofit directors still wore the name even if it didn't quite fit. They introduced my brother Eli with a standing ovation. West Point graduate rising executive VP of Whitmore Academies, the one who looked most like Dad and least like Doubt. My father, Gregory Whitmore Sr., took the stage in his signature Navy suit, the same one he wore on Forbes covers and at closed-door education board hearings. He boomed something about legacy and dignity while the crowd clapped like wind-up toys. I stood near the bar, clutching a glass of Merlot I didn't even want, praying my heels wouldn't betray me. I hadn't been invited directly. The evite came from the foundation's assistant addressed to Ms. Nora Whitmore, guest of Mr. Eli Whitmore, which was a generous way of saying, try not to embarrass him. But I showed up anyway, wearing a black gown my late mother once wore in a photo I used to keep hidden in my sock drawer. It still smelled faintly of lavender and attic. They hadn't seen me since I turned down the family's offer to chair their new scholarship fund, a tax haven masquerading as charity, I'd called it. Instead, I'd gone to work full-time at Learn and Rise, helping expelled teens navigate trauma and get back into school. That apparently was the worst kind of betrayal. Not public shame, public service. I wasn't there to stir the pot. I was there to survive the night. And for a while, I thought I had. I floated between small talk and side glances, poured wine for a stressed-out waiter who looked one step from tears and kept my distance from my father's orbit. I even caught Eli's eye once. He gave me the tight, formal nod he reserved for family and federal judges. It wasn't warmth, but it was something. Then it happened. I stepped back to avoid a woman's diamond-studded clutch and caught my heel on the edge of the Persian rug. The wine in my hand surged forward in slow cinematic betrayal and splashed directly onto the cream silk hem of Senator Levin's wife's dress. She gasped. I froze. My father turned. Cameras flashed, still capturing his reaction. A flicker of disbelief, then rage, the kind that lived just beneath his skin. He strode toward me, not rushed, not loud, just inevitable. His hand didn't hit my face. That would have been too honest, too old school. No, he leaned in, voice razor sharp, and said loud enough for everyone, "You are a liability. Get out." There it was, not, "Are you all right?" Not, "It's just a spill." Just a public execution in 8 words crafted like a press release. I stood there, cheeks burning, the silence around us more brutal than any slap. No one said a word. Not the senator's wife, not the crowd, not Eli, especially not Eli. He was standing just 10 feet away, glass of Glenlivet in hand. He looked at me, then looked away, again. I walked out without saying a word. My heels clacked against marble like accusations. Outside, the Charleston air was thick and wet, the kind of southern humidity that clings to your skin like guilt. My car, parked 3 blocks away because valet didn't recognize my name, was fogged with condensation. I drove in silence. One hand gripped the wheel, the other trembled in my lap. When I reached my apartment, a small second-floor walk-up above an aging art store, I threw my heels into the corner. My phone lit up on the kitchen counter. 42 missed calls. By the time I made tea, it was 53. None of them said, "Are you home safe?" They were all from the estate from Eli, from Gregory's assistant. I played one voicemail. "Nora, what happened tonight was unfortunate, but don't make this worse. Mistakes happen. The foundation can't afford chaos right now. Be smart." Be smart. That's what he always said when he meant be silent. I scrolled through the texts. "Let's fix this quietly. The senator's wife has already forgiven the incident. You need to issue a statement of apology, internal only. Not one word about my dignity, my side, my pain. I didn't cry, not yet. I was past sadness. What I felt was like frost under skin, sharp spreading. I went to the bookshelf and pulled down a green folder I hadn't touched in years. Inside were copies of old emails, therapy notes from college, transcripts of messages Mom left before she died. It was all there, a record of things no one believed. I turned to the last page, blank. At the top in black pen I wrote, "The night I disappeared." And then below that I didn't spill wine, he did. The doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I peeked through the peephole and froze, Eli, alone. He didn't look angry, he looked rehearsed. He held a manila folder. "Nora, can we talk?" I opened the door but didn't let him in. He looked around. "Can we at least not do this in a hallway? You came to give me what, an apology, a cease and desist." He didn't blink. "A proposal." Then he held out the folder. "Dad wants to avoid escalation. There's a draft NDA inside. A settlement offer. You sign. We move on." And if I don't, he hesitated, then it gets messy. That was when I knew. This wasn't a family anymore. It was a boardroom. And I was no longer a daughter. I was a liability. I took the folder, didn't open it. Thanks for the warning. I closed the door slowly, firmly. Behind me, the kettle screamed, and my pulse matched its pitch. Because now this wasn't just personal, it was war. I didn't sleep that night. The folder sat unopened on my kitchen table, its thick beige cover almost humming with threat. I made tea. I paced. I tried to journal, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The steam from the mug fogged my glasses, and the silence inside my apartment felt too loud, like it was leaning in to eavesdrop. I didn't need to read the NDA to know what it said. They wanted silence dressed up as professionalism. A mutual agreement to forget. An offer wrapped in legal ribbons that smelled like control. That wasn't new. Control had always been the currency of my family, but this was the first time they were putting a dollar amount on it. By morning, I'd made a decision, though I hadn't told anyone. My inbox had 3 new emails from the Whitmore Estates legal team. The subject lines alone made my skin crawl: clarification on events at Gala confidential settlement terms, and the one that truly made me laugh: bitterly preserving family legacy. I didn't respond. Instead, I got dressed in jeans and a sweatshirt, pulled my hair into a braid, and drove 40 minutes across the Ashley River to a house I hadn't visited in over a decade. It was a modest 2-story craftsman tucked behind an overgrown camellia head shutters, faded porch swing leaning slightly. I stood in front of it for longer than I should have, gripping my tote bag like armor. Then I rang the bell. A woman answered, silver hair coiled in a messy bun, readers dangling from a beaded chain around her neck, and eyes as sharp as they'd been 20 years ago. Marilyn Whitmore, my late mother's sister, once a Harvard ethics professor, now a semi-retired columnist who'd written exposés that gave governors heartburn. Well, she said, I figured it was either you or Jehovah's Witnesses. Can I come in? She stepped aside. Took you long enough. The living room smelled like cinnamon and printer toner. Books lined every surface. Stacks of newspapers dated back to last election. A cat glared at me from the armchair like I was interrupting something important. We didn't hug. That wasn't Marilyn's way. She poured coffee, handed it over, then sat across from me with a raised brow. Talk. So I did. About the gala, the wine, the humiliation. About Gregory's voice cutting through the crowd like a gavel. About Eli's silence and the folder. I expected her to flinch at some point. She didn't. She just listened, nodding slowly like someone reviewing a case file. When I finished, she leaned back and exhaled. I always said your father would bury his conscience under a plaque someday. I smirked. He offered a settlement. Of course he did. Because reputation matters more than repair. Typical legacy tactic. I'm not signing it. Good. She stood and rummaged through a pile on her desk. Then you need to be smart. You're not just fighting a man. You're fighting an institution that's been grooming its own narrative for a century. She handed me a USB stick. Start here. It's everything I've collected since they tried to erase your mother from the Foundation's history. Press releases, donor shifts, property transfers, patterns. My breath caught. You've been watching his... I don't watch, she corrected. I document. Watching is passive. That night, I read through everything. There were emails from board members, contracts that changed hands days before public scandals, sudden resignations from directors with spotless reputations. It wasn't just personal, it was systemic. The Whitmore name was a brand, and Gregory ran it like a hedge fund. Asset management included people. The next day, I drove downtown to a cafe across from the College of Charleston and met with someone I hadn't seen since undergrad. Caleb Brooks, former journalism TA turned investigative reporter at the Chronicle-Post. We hadn't spoken in years, but one message from me, subject line, "You still chase ghosts," and he replied in minutes. He arrived with a recorder and a notepad like a man who expected either a story or a subpoena. We talked for 2 hours. I gave him dates, names, hinted at financial inconsistencies. I didn't give him the folder or USB yet. Trust even with old friends came slow now. Caleb was cautious but intrigued. You're saying Gregory Whitmore misused charitable funds? I'm saying he used a scholarship foundation to launder silence, and I can prove it. He blinked. That's a hell of a claim. I slid the green notebook across the table, the same one I'd used in college to track my panic attacks. Now it was filled with entries about overlooked board votes, subtle acts of exclusion, donor retreats where I was deliberately left off the invite list. This isn't a lawsuit, I said. It's a record, and it's not just mine. Caleb tapped the cover. You want to go public? I want the truth to stop hiding behind glossy gala photos. That night back at Marilyn's, I told her about the meeting. She nodded, then opened a drawer and pulled out an old envelope. Your mother kept this. It's the original deed to the low country property Gregory tried to hide offshore. He moved it days after you turned down the scholarship chair. I stared at the paper. My father had always told us that house was gifted to the foundation, that it belonged to the mission, but here it was with signatures that told a different story. A timeline that matched the wine spill, a reaction that reeked of fear. "Why are you helping me?" I asked softly. Marilyn didn't answer right away. Then she reached for a faded photo on her mantle. My mom in a white sundress, laughing beside a treehouse Gregory had once tried to bulldoze. "Because she never got the chance," Marilyn said. "And you still can." The next morning, I checked my phone, a single text from Eli. "We need to talk before this goes too far." I replied with one word, "wet." He answered instantly. "Tonight, Dad wants to be there. Neutral place? Downtown? No lawyers." I stared at the screen, heart-pounding thumb hovering. Marilyn walked by, saw the message. "You going?" I nodded. She didn't ask if I was ready. She just said, "Then go in knowing one thing: he doesn't expect you to stand." I looked down at the green notebook. The deed. The USB. My hands shook, but not from fear this time. "I'm not just standing," I whispered. "I'm about to push back." The conference room smelled like antiseptic and expensive wood polish. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked downtown Charleston, but no one looked outside. We sat inside a glass box, 4 walls, no windows that opened, an air so still it felt staged. I got there first. I wanted to. I needed to know how the space felt before they entered, how the light moved across the lacquered table, how the silence echoed off the sterile white walls. I chose the seat across from the door, centered, unmoving. I wasn't hiding in a corner this time. Eli arrived next. His suit was charcoal this time, not navy. His hair perfectly combed, but there was a wrinkle in his collar that told me he'd dressed in a rush. He nodded. No words, no eye contact. A flicker of tension between us like a rubber band stretched tight, waiting to snap. Then came Gregory, my father. He didn't storm in. He glided like he always had. Power without effort. Confidence manufactured over decades of winning rooms. His assistant trailed behind him and immediately set a folder on the table before stepping out. Gregory didn't look at me. He sat down, adjusted his cufflinks, and said, "Nora, you look tired." I held his gaze. "You look rehearsed." Eli shifted beside him, already uncomfortable. My father leaned forward, hands clasped like a pastor mid-sermon. "We're not here to fight. We're here to find a solution that keeps the family intact." I tilted my head. "Intact, you mean quiet?" Gregory didn't flinch. "What happened at the gala, it was unfortunate, but it's done. You had a moment. We all have them." "Is that what you're calling it now?" I asked. "A moment. You called me a liability, in public, in front of senators." Eli spoke finally. "No one's denying it was inappropriate. But Nora, going to the press, do you understand what that would do? Not just to Dad, to everyone. The schools, the scholarships, the name." There it was, the name. Again, always the name, like it had more value than a daughter. "I'm not the one who turned this into a story," I said, pulling the green notebook from my bag. "You did, when you decided humiliation was easier than honesty." Gregory's smile tightened. He pushed the folder across the table. "This is a revised agreement. It includes a generous stipend. A property transfer? Confidentiality, of course. And dignity." I laughed once, short and sharp. "You can't buy dignity, Dad. Especially not from someone you tried to strip it from." His voice dropped. "You've always been dramatic, emotional, your mother's influence." I felt my hand curl around the notebook instinctively. "Say her name again like that, and I'll walk out now." Silence. Gregory stared at me, jaw clenched. "If you go through with this, you'll be painted as unstable, vindictive. We will respond. With legal measures, with testimony, you'll lose." I leaned in. "You already did." He stood. "You are nothing without this family." I stood too. "And you only say that because you finally realize I might be something in spite of it." I turned to Eli. "Would you let him speak to your daughter like that?" Eli didn't answer. His eyes dropped to the folder like it might give him courage, but nothing came. I walked out, not rushed, not angry, just done. Outside, the late afternoon sun poured down on the pavement, and I didn't squint. My hands were shaking, but not from fear adrenaline. "Release," I called Marilyn from the car. "It's done." "You sign anything?" she asked. "No, but I saw everything I needed to." That night, we spread everything out on her dining table. The deed, the USB, the green notebook. She opened her laptop and pulled up the spreadsheet Caleb had sent. It was a leak, unconfirmed but compelling, showing property transactions Gregory had buried through shell trusts and educational subsidiaries. One in particular stood out. A beachfront estate near Kiowa Island transferred just 3 days after the gala. "That's a panic move," Marilyn muttered. "He's shifting assets in case you don't stay quiet." I scrolled through the data. The name on the trust was familiar: JGH Strategic Holdings, Gregory's initials, hidden in plain sight. "He's scared," I whispered. Marilyn didn't look up. They always are. Just not until the women they tried to silence speak louder than the institutions they built. The next morning, I texted Caleb one word ready. His response came within minutes. Meet tonight, 8 p.m., secure location. I met him at an old bookstore turned co-working space in Mount Pleasant. He had a voice recorder, a backup mic, and a folder of his own. He looked more serious than I remembered. This is bigger than one family, he said as he scanned my documents. If what you're showing me checks out, this touches state boards, donor networks, maybe even federal grant abuse. I know. He clicked the recorder. Tell me everything. And I did. From the first time Gregory called me too emotional in front of investors to the time he told a reporter I'd dropped out of college when I hadn't. The gala, the slap, the silence, the settlement. I spoke for nearly 2 hours. At one point, I forgot the mic was there. When I finished, he exhaled. This is more than a story. This is a storm. Then let's make it rain. He leaned back. Do you want your name on it? I paused. All of it. That night, as I left the studio, I passed by a coffee shop window and caught my reflection. Hair messy, eyes tired, shoulders pulled back. For the first time, I looked like someone I'd believe. My phone buzzed, a new message from an unknown number. It read, "You think you're brave. You think this ends with an article? It won't. No name, no signature." I looked around. The street was empty, but I didn't feel alone. I felt watched. I stepped into the nearest light pool from the lamppost and stood there. On purpose. The morning after the threat, I didn't open my blinds. I just stood at the kitchen counter, watching sunlight try to leak through the fabric. I didn't feel fear exactly. It was more like a tightening around my ribs, a cold weight resting just behind my lungs, but I wasn't backing down. If anything, the message had the opposite effect. It clarified everything. This wasn't just about embarrassment anymore. It was about intimidation, coercion. That message was proof I was hitting the right nerve. Marilyn was already up when I got to her place, her reading glasses perched low on her nose, CNN muted on the TV behind her. She barely looked up from her laptop when she asked, "You sleep?" "Not much." She pointed to the counter. "There's coffee and courage if you need it." I poured both. We spent the next few hours finalizing everything with Caleb. The article had gone from an expose to something closer to an avalanche, layered, sourced, threaded with documents, audio testimony. Caleb had uncovered another shell company. Gregory's foundation had been using it to funnel donations into inflated construction bids. One contractor even confirmed it. Yeah, the numbers never made sense, but we were told not to ask questions. "Name on the check," said Whitmore, so we kept our mouths shut. Marilyn and I read through it all 3 times. The final draft was damning not just for Gregory, but for the entire foundation's leadership board. And it wasn't just about the slap anymore. It was about a culture of silence, control, and misused trust. That night, we timed the release to 7:00 p.m., just as the Whitmore Foundation's annual Winter Gala kicked off at the Charleston Civic Pavilion. A grand affair, black tie only where old money toasted itself under strings of imported crystal. I wasn't invited this year, obviously, but I was still attending. I wore my mother's pearl pin. Nothing flashy, just a quiet reminder of the woman they tried to erase. My heels echoed through the underground parking deck as I walked past Ferraris and Teslas, past valet attendants whispering into radios. I wasn't going inside the ballroom. I didn't need to. I only needed the lobby, the timing, and the truth. At exactly 7:03 p.m., Caleb hit publish. The push notifications went out first. Phones buzzed in purses and tuxedo pockets. Then came the texts, the murmurs, the subtle shift in energy that happens when illusion cracks. I watched from the mezzanine, arms crossed as guests glanced at their screens. Furrowed brows whispered names. One man showed his phone to his wife. She froze mid-toast. Then I saw him, Gregory, on stage. His hand clutched the podium like it owed him something. His mouth moved, but his voice was lost under the rising buzz of disruption. Behind him, his assistant darted toward the side exit phone pressed to her ear. Within 5 minutes, 3 donors walked out. One of them glanced up and saw me on the mezzanine. He didn't look shocked. He looked relieved. Then came Eli. He was standing to the right of the stage, shoulders, tight lips pressed into a line. He scanned the room, probably trying to assess damage control to gauge the storm as it built. But then he saw me. We locked eyes. And for a second, just a second, I saw guilt. Not strategy, not annoyance, guilt. Gregory raised his hand, trying to calm the growing noise. "Ladies and gentlemen, please, this is clearly a smear campaign. A personal vendetta from someone deeply troubled." I felt my jaw tighten. The microphone was still on, the camera still rolling. I almost pitied him, almost. The gala continued unraveling as I walked back to my car. I didn't need to see the rest. I already knew how it would play. Denials, threats, legal statements from concerned board members. But I also knew that somewhere in the crowd, someone, maybe a woman like me, would read that article and realize she wasn't crazy. She wasn't alone. Back at the apartment, Marilyn poured champagne. "To the first strike," she said. I didn't toast back, I just whispered, "What now?" She tapped the green notebook. "Now we finish the record." So we did. We added pages, copies of Gregory's emails from years ago, subtle digs about optics, private concerns about Eli's engagement to someone not from the right, social circle manipulation masked as mentorship. I also saved the voicemail again, the one where Gregory told me not to embarrass the family further. Caleb had layered it into the article as an audio embed. Anyone who clicked the link could hear it. The tone, the threat, the complete lack of remorse. And just as we were finishing the final file backup, my phone buzzed again. But this time, it wasn't a threat. It was a message from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. "This is Claire. I worked PR for your father back in 2010. I left for a reason. I know things. If you're ready to dig deeper, I can help." I stared at the screen, heart thudding. A third voice, a crack in the concrete. "Do it," Marilyn said, already reaching for a fresh notebook. Claire met me in a dusty cafe just outside Columbia Square, the kind of place with creaky bar stools, chipped mugs, and a handwritten sign taped over the espresso machine that said, "Out of oat milk. Don't ask." She wore dark glasses and a scarf, even though it was warm, and the moment she sat down, I saw it wasn't for fashion. It was armor. She scanned the room before leaning in. "I can't stay long," she said, voice low. "But you need to hear this before they scrub the trail." What she gave me wasn't just gossip or memories, it was documents. Emails forwarded to her by mistake. PR drafts that had never been published. Internal memos Gregory had dictated word for word, including one titled, "How to Handle Female Discontent Language Guidelines." It wasn't even subtle. Terms like emotional instability, misguided loyalty, false perception. It read like a manual for dismissing women with real grievances. I asked her why she was coming forward now. She didn't answer at first, just stared out the window. "Because I saw what you did," she finally said. And I remembered what I didn't do when it was my turn. She pushed a thumb drive across the table. "This is the original proposal for the Wilkins Center expansion. It was never approved by the board. Gregory moved funds anyway through a dummy vendor. The accountant who questioned it got quietly replaced. No one ever talked about it again." I left the cafe with shaking hands. Not out of fear, out of fury. Claire had just handed me a match and a pile of soaked lies. Back at Maryland's, we started cross-referencing names from the Wilkins documents with the ones Caleb had already traced in the earlier expose. A name popped up twice: Whitmore Public Relations Advisory Committee, an entity that on paper sounded official. In practice, it was just Gregory and two of his most loyal donors using a non-profit shell to funnel reputation-cleaning dollars into silencing bad press. Marilyn grabbed her old filing box labeled "For Later" and began digging. "I always thought this thing was too polished," she muttered. Inside, she found a packet she'd received anonymously during her early whistleblowing days: unsigned statements, a few redacted invoices, one email from someone labeled JP Legal. It all aligned. Gregory wasn't just controlling the foundation, he was weaponizing its structure to create fear-based loyalty. We brought everything to Caleb that evening. He didn't even blink. "This is bigger than I thought," he said. "We're going national with it." He connected us with his editor at the Chronicle, a well-respected outlet with teeth. By morning, the team had launched a formal investigation assigning reporters to every node in the chain. Contractors, former employees, rejected grant applicants, even interns who'd quit mid-semester after inappropriate requests. The story now had 3 threads: abuse of power, financial misconduct, and systemic silencing of women. I wasn't the center of it anymore, and that's what made it stronger. It was no longer my trauma, it was a pattern. The real twist came that night. Marilyn handed me a sealed envelope that had arrived at her doorstep, no return address. Inside was a clean photocopy of an email chain from Gregory to Eli, subject containment strategy. The date 2 days before the gala. Gregory had known I was planning something. He'd been tracking it. And Eli he'd known too. Not just suspected. Known. He hadn't warned me, hadn't even tried. The man who once kissed my forehead and whispered, "I've got your back," had quietly stepped aside to let me burn. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just felt this strange stillness settle over me like frost forming inside my chest. Marilyn watched me closely. "You okay?" "No," I said, "but I know what to do next." The following morning, I texted Eli. Just one line: "Meet me, alone, no excuses." He replied within 10 minutes. "Tomorrow, 5 p.m., Rosebridge Park, the West Bench." I didn't tell Marilyn. I didn't want her trying to talk me out of it. I needed to look him in the eyes. I needed to hear him lie to my face before I took away the last thing he valued: his ability to act like the good guy. When I got to the park the next day, he was already there, hair-perfect suit pressed. as if we were meeting for cocktails, not confrontation. He stood as I approached. You look... Don't. He sighed. I figured this was coming. You knew, I said. You knew what he was doing, and you kept your mouth shut. I didn't have proof, he said. Neither did I. That didn't stop me. He sat down. I didn't. You think I'm like him, he said quietly, but I'm not. No, I replied. You're worse, because you watched and pretended to care. The wind picked up. Somewhere a child laughed. It was such a normal sound it made everything feel more surreal. He stood. If you release that email, it'll drag me down with him. I tilted my head. Maybe you should have thought of that before you hit reply all. His face changed then. Something cold settled behind his eyes. You're making a mistake. No, I said, turning away. I'm correcting one. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. That night, Caleb sent me the final draft of the second article. This one had names. A timeline of cowardice dressed as professionalism, Eli's included. And just as I was about to hit approve for release, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. The message read, "You've had your fun. Stop now or someone else gets hurt." The moment I read that message, "You've had your fun. Stop now or someone else gets hurt." A chill crawled up my spine like ice water down the back of my neck. Not fear exactly. Something worse. A cold certainty that they were no longer playing defense. They were cornered, and a cornered animal always bites. I forwarded the message to Caleb and Marilyn without commentary. Within minutes, Marilyn called. "We need to move. Now. This means they know you're winning." I wanted to believe she was just being dramatic, but then Caleb replied with something that hit harder than the text. "My car was broken into last night. Only thing taken was my laptop. Not the wallet, not even the camera bag. Just the drive with our backup. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak in the floorboards, every gust of wind brushing the window pane made my heart stutter. At one point, I sat on the living room floor in the dark, my back against the wall, laptop in my lap. Watching the cursor blink as I typed out every fact I could remember, names, dates, small gestures, strange looks, whispered conversations from years ago. I wasn't just documenting now, I was preserving. By morning, I was on a train out of the city. Caleb had arranged for me to meet with an attorney he trusted, someone who'd defended whistleblowers before. The ride was long and I stared at the blur of passing trees like they held the answers I didn't. At one point, a little girl in the seat ahead of me turned around and offered me a fruit snack. "You look sad," she said. I smiled weakly. "I'm not sad, sweetheart, just thinking too much." The lawyer's office was in a converted firehouse, brick walls and iron beams, minimalist but warm. Her name was Sophia Reyes, sharp eyes behind librarian glasses and a voice that carried zero tolerance for nonsense. After listening to my story, every word she pushed a thick stack of papers toward me. "We go public, we file preemptive defamation protection, and we issue a cease and desist against any known threats. You'll need to stay offline for a while, but I can shield your assets, set up encrypted comms, and prep for a countersuit if they retaliate." For the first time in weeks, I felt something like safety. Not peace, not yet, but structure, a battle plan. Back in the city, the second article dropped. Caleb's team had timed it to coincide with the board meeting Gregory had called, supposedly to reaffirm trust in the Foundation's vision. Instead, as the piece went live, complete with screenshots, testimonies, and the leaked email chain from Gregory to Eli, their entire vision collapsed. Donors began pulling out in real time. Social media lit up like a storm. Influencers, journalists, alumni from Whitmore, even politicians weighed in. People were angry not just at Gregory, but at the entire system that had let someone like him operate for so long. And then came the bombshell. A former intern posted a thread with receipts, literal screenshots of late-night messages from Gregory promising career leverage in exchange for private mentorship. He denied it, of course. Issued a public statement full of legalese and polished deflection. The allegations are deeply upsetting. While I vehemently deny any wrongdoing, I will temporarily step back to allow for a full investigation. It was a classic PR move, but the internet wasn't buying it. Still, the damage wasn't just professional, it was personal. My sister Elise, someone I hadn't heard from in years, texted me. "Saw the article. Didn't know. I'm sorry. That single message meant more than I could explain. Not because it fixed anything, but because it acknowledged the silence we'd both been raised to accept." But the relief was short-lived. The third message came in 2 days later. A photo this time. Me at the park with Eli. Taken from a distance. And below it just 5 words, "You never were invisible." I felt my throat tighten. Not just at the threat, but at what it implied. Surveillance, tracking, real-time intimidation. This wasn't just a warning, it was proof that someone still had eyes on me. I showed the photo to Sophia. She stared for a long moment, then said, "We file for a restraining order. and we move you immediately. That night, I packed a single bag. Marilyn stood in the doorway of her apartment, arms crossed. You sure about this? I nodded. I have to disappear before I can finish this. They're not playing chess anymore. They're throwing bricks. As I stepped out into the night, I didn't feel brave. I felt hunted. But I also felt something else calm. Because fear no longer paralyzed me, it propelled me. The safe house was a tiny bungalow on the edge of nowhere. No Wi-Fi. Burner phone only. Every surface smelled like pine and dust. But it had locks on every door, thick curtains, and a silence that didn't carry footsteps behind it. I spent the first day sleeping. The second day sorting through flash drives and backups. On the third day, Marilyn called. Her voice was low urgent. One of Gregory's partners flipped. A guy named Vincent Lin. He's agreed to testify. But there's one condition: he wants to meet you, face to face, tomorrow. I froze. What? He says there's something only you'll understand. Vincent Lin arrived 10 minutes early. I watched from the back booth of the cafe, a quiet place just outside town, all burnt brick walls and bitter coffee. He looked older than the photos, not worn down but hardened, like someone who'd stood in the blast zone and walked away with a limp and secrets no one dared ask about. He scanned the room, spotted me, and approached with the caution of someone who knew conversations like ours could change the course of more than just headlines. Ms. Arden, he said, extending a hand. Thank you for coming. I shook it, noting the tremor in his fingers. Not weakness, something else, a kind of fear he'd spent years denying. We talked for almost an hour. He didn't waste time apologizing. He got right to it. Gregory has offshore holdings that go way deeper than the ones exposed in the second article. Shell corporations slush funds through charity arms, political donations to silence people. And your article shook loose a deal he'd spent years securing. He's unraveling, but he's also retaliating. I leaned in. What does that have to do with me? He sighed, rubbing his jaw like the truth was a splinter he'd buried deep and now had to pull out. You're not just a whistleblower to him. You're a symbol. And symbols get destroyed publicly so others learn the cost of rebellion. Then he slid a flash drive across the table. This contains enough to trigger an investigation at the federal level, but if you use it, it'll get ugly. You'll be painted as a vindictive daughter, an unstable ex-employee, whatever sticks. Your family's name might never recover. I stared at it. That little piece of plastic suddenly felt heavier than a stone. You think I care about the Jordan name? I said quietly. They buried me under it for years. Vincent nodded. Then go finish what you started. But don't expect closure. Expect consequence. I left the cafe shaking not from fear, but from the weight of the choice I'd already made. I didn't call Sophia, or Caleb, or Marilyn. I didn't even text Lila. I just drove straight back to the safe house and plugged in the flash drive. Inside were spreadsheets, voice memos, bank transfers routed through Luxembourg and Belize. One file labeled Special Ledger had a line item tied to my old nonprofit. Someone had anonymously funneled a $50,000 donation after I left. A bribe disguised as philanthropy. I had proof now, enough to burn it all down. But the moment I hit send to our media contact, the screen froze. Then a ping. New message. Blocked ID. You want truth? Here's yours. Elijah was just the beginning. My breath caught. Eli, my mentor, the only man in that world who treated me like I had a mind worth listening to. He died of a stroke 3 years ago. At least that's what we were told. I opened the attachment. It was a scanned medical report with red flags all over it. Heart medication switched 2 weeks before his collapse. No family autopsy. Prescribed by Gregory's personal physician. I backed away from the laptop like it had grown teeth. This wasn't just about money or power anymore. It was about control so absolute it killed the ones who stepped out of line. I thought about walking away, about disappearing again. But then I looked around the safe house at the piles of notes, the evidence, the photo of Eli still taped to the edge of my screen. I thought of my mother too, the one who never made it out of that gilded prison, and of every woman after me who'd be told to shut up, sit still, and be grateful. So I packed my bag and drove back into the city, my mind racing through timelines, names, and worst-case scenarios. By the time I reached Sophia's office, I had one goal: immunity for Vincent, full protection order for anyone named in the drive, and a joint release with both state and federal law enforcement. The plan was simple transparency at scale. We would go wide and loud. Sophia moved like lightning. By morning, subpoenas were being drafted, and within 48 hours, the DOJ issued a statement. We are actively reviewing claims of financial misconduct, witness intimidation, and criminal negligence tied to multiple organizations affiliated with the Jordan Foundation. The story exploded. National news, primetime panels, public outrage. Suddenly, I wasn't just the girl who spilled wine. I was the woman who cracked a dynasty. But behind the headlines, the backlash grew sharper. Anonymous threats turned into slashed tires, broken windows, a dead bird on my apartment doorstep. Gregory wasn't arrested, not yet. But he went into hiding. Cole vanished from social media. And my father, he called me. Just once. I let it go to voicemail. He sounded old. Not angry, just deflated. You win. Okay, you win. But what did you really get? You think the truth sets you free? No, honey. It just gets you alone. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I saved the voicemail, labeled it Last Lie. And then for the first time, I opened the green notebook and wrote something new. Freedom doesn't look like marble floors. It looks like standing in the wreckage of everything that tried to own you and realizing you're still breathing. Weeks passed. I moved into a real apartment. Still small, but mine. Painted the walls a soft blue. Grew basil on the windowsill. I got offers to speak, to write, to consult, but I said no. Not yet. I needed quiet. Needed to remember how to just exist without performing. One night, I sat on my fire escape with a blanket and a glass of wine, watching the city shimmer in the dark. A message came in. Unknown number. Are you the one who took him down? I typed back, no, I'm the one who told the truth. The reply came fast. Then I need your help. He wasn't the only one. The safe house smelled like lemon oil and silence. For the first time in weeks, I didn't sleep with one eye open. I had made peace with fear, not because it had disappeared, but because it no longer dictated my decisions. The morning after receiving Vincent Lynn's flash drive and the terrifying message about Elijah, I met with Sophia, Marilyn, and Caleb in a private legal co-working space in Savannah. Sophia was already on the phone with federal prosecutors. Caleb was uploading backups into a secure encrypted vault with two-factor authentication. Marilyn, as always, moved like she had read the next chapter before any of us had even opened the book. Gregory's house of cards is collapsing, Caleb said. But he's not going down alone. I nodded, staring at a printout of the scanned report showing Eli's cause of death. It wasn't just negligence, it was murder masquerading as misfortune, a life taken for the sake of silence. He wanted a legacy, I whispered. Now he'll get a memorial and a court transcript. Subpoenas dropped like rain. DOJ announced a multi-agency task force. The Chronicle Post published a third article this time with a headline that left no ambiguity. Jordan Dynasty crumbles murder allegations, financial fraud, and the whistleblower who said enough. Claire went on record. Vincent testified under oath. Former employees poured in with stories like bloodletting. One woman said she'd been blacklisted from academia for refusing Gregory's mentorship advances. Another revealed she'd been paid off after catching suspicious financial transactions. They thought they were alone. Now they knew they weren't. Gregory was arrested at a private airfield 2 miles from the South Carolina coast. He was trying to leave the country. The mugshot went viral. Not because of the scandal, but because of the expression. Not rage, not sorrow, just emptiness. Eli's name trended for days. People debated whether he was complicit or a casualty. I didn't join the debate. I just sent his fiancée the medical report anonymously with a note that read, "He loved you." Even in the end, I stood at the edge of the low country property, the one Gregory had tried to bury offshore. Now it was being repurposed into a trauma recovery center for youth. The trees swayed with the kind of quiet that only exists after a storm. The green notebook sat in my hands, almost full, every page a testament. I thought I was writing the story of my downfall. Turns out I was recording a resurrection. A car pulled up behind me. Marilyn stepped out with her cat carrier in one hand and an overstuffed canvas bag in the other. Got room for a displaced aunt with opinions and cinnamon coffee cake. I laughed for the first time in days. Always, Gregory's trial became a national fixation. Plea deals were offered. Some took them. He didn't. He insisted on his innocence until the very end. The judge wasn't convinced. The verdict guilty on all counts. Embezzlement, witness tampering, second-degree manslaughter in connection with Elijah's death. He's serving 35 years in federal prison. His name stripped from the foundation. His portrait removed from every hallway. The Jordan name still exists, but it no longer echoes like a weapon. As for me, I published The Green Notebook. It became a best-selling memoir, The Quiet is Loudest When You're Done Being Afraid. I didn't become famous. I didn't want to. I just wanted to be seen. Sometimes women don't want to change the world. Sometimes they just want to stop pretending it hasn't already tried to destroy them. And now when someone asks who I am, I don't say I'm a Jordan. I say, I'm Nora. I'm the one who stayed. Fade to black. Story 2. You're not in the will, not one penny. My stepmother sneered. The lawyer smiled. Ma'am, the trust already transferred $50 million to her. Henderson Elias and Associates law offices smelt of aged leather and money. I waited in the waiting area, admiring the oil paintings of stern-faced partners while my stepmother Callista held court with her children, Dorian and Chloe, whispering excitedly about their spending sprees. First thing I'm doing is buying that yacht, Dorian said, swiping through his phone. The 60-footer we looked at in Miami. I'm thinking of a house in the Hamptons, Chloe explained, flicking her blonde hair. Something tasteful, maybe 8 bedrooms. Callista stroked their hands with her finely manicured nails, which had been burrowing into my father's riches for the previous 7 years. Now, children, let's not be gauche. We'll discuss investments after we handle the formalities. She flashed me a venomous glance from across the waiting room. I answered by checking my phone and pretended to be engrossed in emails while she sat. Though I don't know why she even bothered showing up, Callista said quietly on stage. Thaddeus made his wishes very clear before he died. Thaddeus, she couldn't even call him my father right now. The receptionist appeared. Mr. Elias will see you all now. We entered the conference room where James Elias was waiting with my father's will folder spread out before him. He was trying hard to keep his professional demeanor, but something in his eyes suggested he was holding back amusement. Please, everyone have a bite. A seat, he urged, pointing to the chairs. Can I offer anyone water coffee? This might take a while, let's just get this over with, Callista replied swiftly, sliding into what she plainly saw as the dominant position at the table. I have a meeting with my financial advisor at 3. Of course. Mr. Elias opened the folder. First, let me express my condolences on the loss of Thaddeus Morrison. He was a client for over 30 years, and yes, very sad. Callista interjected. Now about the estate division. Mr. Elias? His eyes moved slightly. Indeed. Let's begin with the reading of Mr. Morrison. Mr. Morrison's last will and testament dated 5 years ago. 5 years, I inquired quietly. Wasn't it updated more recently? Callisto's laughter was as piercing as broken glass. Oh, sweetie, you really don't understand how these things work, do you? Thaddeus and I revised everything after our wedding. Made sure the estate stayed in the immediate family. The immediate family, I reiterated. Meaning the people who actually cared for him in his final years. Callista replied kindly, not the daughter who barely visited but too busy with her little non-profit job to spend time with her father. I recalled all the visits she'd inexplicably arranged during her hair appointments. She failed to inform me about the family dinners when my father inquired about me. She always told him that I was too busy. Shall we proceed? Elias inquired, revealing a curious glint of restrained mirth. Please do, Callista said. I believe you'll find everything is quite straightforward. The estate is divided between myself and my children with a small token left to charity. As for Celine here, she gets nothing. Callista proclaimed triumphantly, unable to restrain herself any longer. I made sure of it. 7 years of marriage, and I finally got Thaddeus to see sense about his ungrateful daughter. You're not in the will, Celine. Not one penny. The room went silent. Dorian and Chloe were grinning like sharks that had smelled blood. Callista resembled a cat who had swallowed an entire aviary. That's when Mr. Elias began laughing. Not a chuckle. This is not a professional throat clearing. A hearty, genuine chuckle rang through the wood panels. I'm sorry, he admitted, wiping his eyes. That was unprofessional. It's just Mrs. Morrison. Do you know what a revocable living trust is? Callisto's triumphant expression flashed. Of course I do. It's a financial instrument. Very good, Mr. Bede. Elias replied, choking back giggles. And do you know when Thaddeus established his children's trust? Children, Callista demanded. He only had one child with her. Actually, Mr. Elias pulled out another, much thicker folder. Thaddeus established the Morrison Family Trust 28 years ago when Celine was 10. It's been growing ever since. So Callista, his voice was losing confidence. He revoked it when we updated the will. Did he, Mr. Elias, retrieve a document? Because I have here the trust documents, including all amendments. The last one was made 13 months ago. You know what's interesting about trust? Mrs. Morrison? Callista murmured nothing as her face began to pale behind her pricey makeup. They're completely separate from wills, Mr. Elias explained. And in this case, the trust was structured to transfer all assets to Celine on either her 38th birthday or upon Thaddeus' death, whichever came first. That's impossible, Callista said quietly. Celine. Mr. Elias asked me when was your birthday 14 months ago. I replied gently. Dad threw me a party, a small one. Callista was at a spa this weekend. Yes, Mr. Elias nodded. The weekend Thaddeus came to see me, he was quite specific about the timing. Wanted to make sure everything transferred cleanly before. Well before any potential complications. Ma'am, he continued, going back to Callista. You can't change a trust that already transferred 50 million last year. Callista's cheeks as white as fresh paper. Her mouth expanded and closed like a landed fish. 50, Dorian's voice broke. 50 million, Mr. Elias clarified. That was the value 14 months ago with the market performance and the dividend reinvestment. It's currently valued at approximately $57 million. But the houses, Chloe cried. The cars, the bank accounts all held by the trust, calmly answered Mr. Elias, which transferred to Celine last year. You've been living in Celine's houses, driving Celine's cars, and spending Celine's money for the past 14 months. I finally spoke. Dad told me to wait. Said it would be better to let everything play out naturally. He wanted to see if you changed Callista, if you'd stop being so. I couldn't find it. Inquisitive. This is fraud, Callista exclaimed. We'll sue. Thaddeus wasn't in his right mind. Actually, Mr. Elias took out a medical report. Thaddeus had a comprehensive cognitive evaluation 13 months ago. Perfect scores across the board. He also had 3 psychiatrists confirm his mental capacity. He was, and I quote, sharp as a tack and twice as pointed. His words, not mine. But why, Dorian inquired, his expression betraying genuine confusion. Why would he do this? I stared at him with something like pity. Because he saw what you were doing, all of you. The credit cards you took out in his name. Dorian. The jewelry you bought and charged to his accounts. Chloe, and you. Callista. I turned to face my stepmother. The systematic isolation from his friends and family, the medication mix-ups that kept him foggy. The way you moved your mother into the guest house without asking? You can't prove any of that. Callista screamed. I don't have to, I replied. Dad did. I don't have to, I replied. Dad already did. He hired a private investigator 2 years ago. Would you like to see the reports Mr. Elias presented? Another folder filled with images and documentation. Thaddeus was particularly interested in your first marriage, Mrs. Morrison. How did your first husband die again? Medication mix-up, wasn't it? The silence was terrible. Now Mr. Elias said vigorously, Let's discuss the actual will. It's quite simple. To my beloved wife, Callista Morrison, I leave the sum of $1, the amount she truly deserves, to Dorian and Lyra Whitfield. I leave the same the remainder of my estate, consisting mainly of personal effects. Since the trust already transferred, all assets goes to Celine. He took out $3 more and put them on the table. That's it, Chloe whispered. $1. Actually, I explained, reaching inside my purse, I have something for each of you. I took out 3 envelopes. Eviction notices. You have 30 days to vacate my properties. All of them. You can't evict us. Callista jumped up so quickly that her chair tipped over. I'm his widow. You're a tenant, I corrected him. Living rent-free in my house. Well, houses the main estate. The beach house, the mountain cabin, and whatever apartment Dorian's been keeping in the city. How did you do? Dorian asked. The same way Dad knew about your gambling debts, I said. And Lyra's shopping addiction, and Callisto's. Interesting investment history. You weren't nearly as clever as you thought. Mr. Elias cleared his throat. There is one more matter, Thaddeus. His letter to be read after the will. He took out an envelope and handed it to me. He insisted you read it aloud. I opened it and recognized my father's handwriting. My darling Celine. If you're reading this, it means our plan worked wonderfully. I apologize for the lie, but I wanted to know who Callista truly was, and I needed to keep you safe while I found out. You were correct to be skeptical when I remarried so soon after your mother died. You've always had exceptional intuition. What you didn't realize was that I was already sick. The cancer diagnosis arrived just weeks after the wedding. Callista seemed like someone who would look after me. Instead, she exposed her actual self. Thank you for believing me when I urged you to play along. Thank you for pretending to be pushed aside when I transferred funds into the trust. Thank you for allowing them to think they had triumphed while we safeguarded your future. Callista, Dorian, and Chloe, I understand exactly who you are. The investigators' reports are with the district attorney who has pledged to evaluate them following my death. I recommend that you use your 30-day notice properly. Celine, my daughter, you are all I could have wished for. Strong, patient, intellectual, and most importantly, good will take care of the riches I've left you. But most importantly, look after yourself with all my love. Dad. P.S. Your mother's engagement ring is in my desk drawer, second to the left. Callista started eyeing it, so I hid it. It's yours now, just like she always meant. Callista had collapsed back into her chair before I finished reading. Dorian was feverishly texting most likely his bookie. Lyra was crying black mascara dripping down her face. Is there anything else? Callista asked Mr. Elias, her voice scarcely audible. Just this. He continued bringing out another document, a restraining order. Celine filed it this morning. You're to have no contact with her after you vacate the properties. Any attempt to contest the trust or will shall result in immediate enforcement. You planned this, Callista replied, looking at me. You both planned this? Dad planned it, I explained. I just followed his lead, just like you followed the same playbook you used on your first husband. Oh, did you think Dad didn't know about Charles? About the insurance policy, about the medication you gave him? That was never proven. Callista replied immediately. No, I agree. But it's interesting how history repeats itself. Or would have if Dad hadn't been smarter than you gave him credit for. I stood and collected my copies of the documents. Mr. Elias, thank you for everything. For helping my father protect what mattered most to him. My pleasure, he replied, still suppressing a smile. Your father was a brilliant man. This was the most elegant estate planning I've ever seen. As I approached the door, Callista said, Celine, please. I was his wife. Doesn't that count for something? I turned back. It counts for exactly what you put into the marriage. Lies, manipulation, and greed. Dad figured out your true value, Callista. $1. He was generous. I wouldn't have given you that much. I left them there in disbelief, staring at their dollar bills in the parking lot. I sat in my vehicle. Not any more trust, actually. Mine. And exhaled a breath I'd been holding for 14 months. My telephone rang. My dad's nurse was the only one Callista couldn't fire. How did it go? She inquired. Exactly as Dad predicted. I remarked down to Callista as demand for proof. He'd be so proud, Maeve added quietly. He talked about you constantly. Those last weeks said you were the only person who never wanted anything from him but his time. I miss him, I said. I know, honey, but he made sure you'd be okay. That was all he cared about in the end. Not punishing them, though, that was a nice bonus. Just making sure you were protected. After we hung up, I drove to the cemetery. Dad's grave was decorated in fresh flowers. I'd been coming every week, but Callista had told everyone I never came. We did it, Dad, I said quietly to the headstone. Just like you planned. They never saw it coming. The wind rustled the trees, and for a brief moment, I thought I could hear his laugh from when we were sitting in Mr. Elias's office signing paperwork while Callista spent the weekend at the spa. She thinks she's so clever. He'd stated before, but clever and smart aren't the same thing. You're smart, Celine. You know the difference between taking care of someone and taking them for everything they have. I placed a solitary rose on his grave, which was his favorite. The coral ones from Mom's garden, which I still kept, and went home. Not to the estate where Callista was most likely feverishly packing, but back to the modest house Dad had covertly purchased in my name years ago. The one where I'd been living quietly, making them believe I was struggling while the trust gained wealth. Dad was correct. Clever and smart were not synonymous. Callista was a brilliant person. I assumed that would be the end of it. I thought stepping out of the law office with a restraining order and a triumph would bring me comfort. But I had underestimated Callista. She was clever, remember, and bright people do not take humiliation lying down. It began 3 days following the reading. I was deadheading flowers in the garden behind the modest house Dad had bought for me, allowing the silence to settle in like a salve on a sore. That's when I noticed the first envelope. No stamp, just hidden inside my gate. White thin addressed me in red pen. There was a snapshot inside. I'm outside the grocery shop, leaning over to recover a dropped receipt taken from behind a bush. I froze. A note was scrawled across the bottom with the same red pen. Nice car. Shame if something happened to it. I called May first. She was horrified. You need to go to the police, she said. Now I did. They took my statement and photograph, but the officer just gave a sympathetic shrug. It's hard to prove intent with something like this. Could be a prank. Could be nothing. Just keep a log of everything. I wanted to shout, nothing. We were chatting about Callista. This woman removed her dying husband's pals from his life, like chess pieces. Of course she wouldn't leave peacefully. The following event occurred 4 nights later. My doorbell rang at 2:13 a.m. I sat up in bed hard in my throat. I grabbed my phone and viewed the camera stream from the doorbell app. No one. I turned on the front porch light, still nothing. But when I opened the door, a brick landed on the porch with a thump. It was balanced against the door, and someone had scrawled into the side, "Get out." This time the police arrived. They performed a sweep. There are no traces of forced entry, no fingerprints, there are no footprints, nobody had seen anything. They offered to enhance patrols but reiterated no real threat, not yet. I changed my locks the following day. I upgraded my security system, purchased 2 extra cameras, and then the rumors began. I received a call from the head of the organization where I worked. "Celine, I wanted to speak with you personally before this gets around. Someone's been sending anonymous tips to the board alleging financial misconduct." My heart has stopped. What kind of misconduct? Personal use of donor funds, unauthorized travel, lavish expenses, all of it dated within the last 18 months. "That's impossible, I believe you," she replied kindly. "But the board has to review the claims. We'll be doing a full audit. In the meantime, we need you to take a leave of absence." I hung up and screamed into the stillness of the home. Callista wasn't only out for vengeance, she was attempting to erase me. Bit by bit. I considered going public, posting everything. The will, the trust, the threats. But my father had advised me against it. She thrives in chaos. You stay silent. You hold the high ground. I lasted 2 weeks, then Dorian showed up. He waited outside the building where my support group gathered. I noticed him resting against a black automobile. I recognized from the family's fleet. He was thin or pale, but he's still wearing a Rolex and attempting to seem smug. "What do you want?" I asked without stopping my pace. "We need to talk. There's a restraining order. Not for me, just for Mom. And I think you should hear this." I paused just for a second, but that was sufficient. He slipped a folded piece of paper into my hand. "Check that account. You'll see what she's been hiding." I did not sleep that night. I remained up digging, utilizing what Dad had taught me about asset tracing. The account was authentic offshore Cayman Islands. What about the beneficiary, Laura Whitfield? What is the amount? $1.4 million. I still went. Then I checked for more. There were 5 accounts. All have opened during the last 2 years. All are linked to shell businesses. All are tied to Callisto's mother, Lyra, or Dorian, all funded by transfers from a now-defunct charity foundation that Callista had formerly co-chaired. I stared at the figures. She had not merely planned to inherit. She had been stealing long before Dad died. What if I could find it? So could the Internal Revenue Service. I called a friend of Dad's, a retired tax attorney named Alaric. "Are you finally ready to burn her down?" he said, his voice dry. "I want it public. I want everything exposed." "Then you need the media, and you need to file with the DOJ. We spent the next 6 days putting together the case, and once it was sealed, I sent a complete packet to the local district attorney, the IRS Criminal Division, and 3 investigative journalists. Then I waited and waited until a knock came. Not at my door this time on Callista. They arrested her at the country club. Mid-lunch, mid-mimosa, in front of everyone she wanted to impress. I did not see it in person, but someone provided me with a video. It went viral on Facebook in less than 3 hours. Callista, wearing a silk blouse and large sunglasses, is handcuffed by 2 federal agents. Dorian attempted to stop them and was tackled. Lyra yelled, "This is a mistake." However, the facts did not care about theatrics. 3 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of money laundering, 1 case of elder abuse. The last one hit the hardest because that meant Dad. The DA called me 2 days later. "Ms. Morrison, thank you for your cooperation. This case would have taken much longer without your documentation. Will there be a trial? Most likely not. Her lawyers are pushing for a deal. She knows we have her." I thanked him, then I hung up and headed to the beach. Home, not for vengeance. To wrap things up, it still smelled like her perfume. Fake lilies and something floral would always make my throat itch. I opened every window, let the salt air drive her away. I found the old photo books under the bar. One was torn in half. It was a photo of Dad and me at 17 clutching a college acceptance letter and him grinning as if I were the son. She had attempted to delete it. I taped it back together. The eviction notices stood naturally. Dorian and Lyra fought them. They argued that they had a lifestyle right to the residences, but the judge didn't buy it. By the end of the month, they were gone. And the best part, the same reporters that saw the arrest video wanted to know my tale. I told them everything. Not with malice, not with brutality, just the truth. The rise and fall of a woman who believed she could outsmart everyone. The daughter who played the long game. People began reaching out, real strangers. Women daughters, nurses, lawyers. Callista is an example of someone who has endured. They called me brave. Some people dubbed me a hero. But I did not feel like one. I just felt liberated. Dad's grave received more flowers that month than ever before. One evening, I sat on the mountain cottage porch, a blanket wrapped around my shoulders and a cup of tea in my hands. Maeve came to visit. We watched the sunset silently. He really did it. She finally said he protected you, even after he was gone. He always kept his promises, I said softly. There was a letter in my pocket. Another one from Dad. Alaric noticed a second sealed envelope in the trust lockbox. Inside was a single sentence. She built her kingdom on sand. You, Celine, were always the stone. I cried for the first time in weeks. Not because I was sad, but finally I felt whole. I should have felt safe. But peace doesn't come that easily when you've been trained to flinch every time the doorbell rings. For the next few weeks, things were quiet, too quiet. I resumed my work with the nonprofit, though, remotely. I began restoring the old beach cottage, Dad's favorite. Maeve helped with the garden. For a moment, it almost felt like healing, until the letter arrived. Not a threat. Not red pen scrawled across the envelope this time. It was typed, neat, precise, cold. We both know this isn't over. Enjoy the ashes, darling. See, no signature, no address, but I knew the tone like the back of my hand. 2 days later, the police knocked at my door. Miss Morrison, we need to ask you a few questions. Do you know anything about a safety deposit box in Zurich? I blinked. Zurich, Switzerland. The officer nodded. The contents were flagged in an international financial fraud sting. There are documents implicating you. At first, I laughed. It sounded too absurd. But when they handed me the photos, printed wire transfers, falsified charity filings bearing my name, I stopped breathing for a moment. Callista had forged everything, again. This wasn't about petty revenge anymore. This was nuclear. If I hadn't kept backups, if I hadn't documented every single conversation with my father, they might have believed I was complicit. I called Alaric. She planted evidence in a Swiss bank. She's going global. He sighed. She's panicking. That means she's sloppy. We called in a forensic analyst and dug deep into her remaining digital footprint. And that's when we uncovered the final twist. She had a fixer. A man named Marcus Leclerc, former investment manager turned shadow broker. The kind of man who vanished between jurisdictions and had no online presence, just whispers. Guess who else had once signed power of attorney to him? Charles Whitfield, her first husband. Dad was right. Callista didn't repeat mistakes, she refined them. I made a choice that weaves. Instead of hiding behind lawsuits and subpoenas, I reached out to a journalist from ProPublica. Someone who had covered financial abuse cases before. I gave her everything. The documents, the hidden trusts, the forgery evidence, Marcus's link to Charles's death, the Zurich trail. And I told her my story, not the polished version, the full one. From Dad's early suspicions to the fake letters to the spa weekends that covered up medication tampering to how Callista built a kingdom of shadows while playing the grieving wife. The piece went live on a Thursday. By Friday, it had over 6 million views. By Monday, an Interpol red notice was issued for Marcus Leclerc. By Wednesday, Callista was denied bail after new charges were filed: international fraud and conspiracy to commit murder. Callista pleaded guilty to avoid extradition complications. She took a deal 35 years, no possibility of parole for at least 18. Dorian. He turned state's witness, not for remorse, for self-preservation. Lyra. She vanished into anonymity. Last I heard, she was renting an apartment under her maiden name. The IRS recovered over $8.7 million from hidden assets. Most were rerouted to elder abuse prevention nonprofits. Dad would have liked that. As for me, I sold the main estate. Too much noise in those walls, too many echoes. I kept the cottage. The mountain one, quiet, clean, life. I still hear his voice when I walk the trail behind the ridge. Smart people build on stone, Celine. You were always the stone. On the anniversary of the will reading, I got a letter from the district attorney's office. Inside was a simple certificate. In recognition of your courage, your commitment to truth, and your protection of legacy. I framed it. Not because I needed the validation, but because Dad would have smiled. The good kind, the one that made you feel seen. Sometimes when I open the back windows of the beach house and let the sea breeze rush in, I hear that laugh again. That same one from Elias's office. Dad's laugh. Not vengeful, not bitter, just proud. Because in the end, we didn't just win the money. We won everything that mattered. Peace, truth, freedom. And for Callista, well, $1 was generous. But jail time, that was priceless.